Gregory Vale used to believe there wasn't a problem that money couldn't solve. That belief had built his empire, carried him through hostile boardrooms, and made him one of the most powerful men in the city. But all of that power meant nothing on mornings like this. Walking beside the still, silent figure of his daughter in a wheelchair, her legs wrapped tightly beneath a blanket she no longer asked for. The sky was the same muted gray as the pavement, as though the world had grown tired of color. Naomi, only 8, stared down at the cracks in the sidewalk with eyes too old for her face. The wheels of her chair gave off a soft, repetitive squeak with every turn, like the ticking of a quiet clock counting down something neither of them could name. Gregory pushed her gently, more out of ritual than necessity. Their walks were no longer walks but drifting, slow pilgrimages toward nowhere. 2 years had passed since the accident, but for Gregory, time had folded in on itself. He remembered the hospital lights, the way doctors spoke in softened tones that still managed to strike like hammers. Spinal trauma, irreversible, she'll never walk again. They had offered a vocabulary of sympathy, of resignation, but no solutions. And Gregory, man of results, fixer of fortunes, had stared at them like a drowning man hearing someone describe the water. He had taken Naomi across continents. Switzerland, Singapore, Los Angeles, neurosurgeons, stem cell trials, energy healers who spoke of alignment and flow. He had wired millions to strangers in white coats, desperate for a miracle disguised as a breakthrough. All had failed. The results were always the same. Numbness from the waist down. Muscles that refused to respond. A daughter who stopped dreaming about running, who now asked only to stay in bed a little longer each morning. There were no tantrums. No tears. Only stillness. And that, Gregory had come to learn, was more terrifying. She no longer asked, "When will I walk again?" She no longer asked anything at all. And Gregory, once a titan of negotiation, found himself bargaining with silence. He stayed up at night rehearsing prayers he didn't believe in, Googling obscure clinics at 3 a.m., scanning forums filled with desperate parents trading rumors like contraband. He had learned the currency of hope was both priceless and poisonous. Too little and you surrendered. Too much, and it shattered you anew. This morning was no different. They walked, or rather, moved through the same city block they always passed. Gregory's suit was pressed, but his eyes weren't. Naomi wore her favorite knitted beanie, but only because he had placed it on her head. They didn't speak. Their lives had become an orchestration of unspoken rules. Don't mention her legs. Don't mention the past. Don't look too hopeful. They were two ghosts pretending to be father and daughter. As they turned onto a narrow alley to avoid the busier street, Gregory caught sight of their reflection in a store window, a man haunted by his failures and a child carried by them. It was there, in that alley heavy with silence and forgotten things, that the voice came. Not from a doctor, not from a nurse, not from anyone with a title or credentials. "Uncle," the voice said, "I know how to make your daughter walk again." The words fell like glass onto concrete. Gregory froze, one hand still on the wheelchair handle. He turned slowly, already bracing for insult or scam. The world had taught him to doubt kindness, to distrust anything that came without a price tag. But what he saw wasn't a con man. It was a boy no older than Naomi, standing barefoot on the edge of the alley, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, his dark face smudged with city dirt, his eyes holding something rare and unwelcome in Gregory's world. Certainty. Gregory's first instinct was suspicion. His gaze swept over the boy, calculating in the way that had made him a millionaire by 30, age, size, posture, clothing, every detail examined as though the boy were a column on a balance sheet. Barefoot. Left knee scraped. Fingers twitching slightly at his side, like someone unused to being still. But it was the eyes that unsettled him. Not because they were wild, but because they weren't. They held no fear, no desperation. Just that unbearable calm. As if he had been waiting here, in this alley, for exactly this moment. Naomi turned slightly in her chair to look, but said nothing. Her gaze lingered on the boy longer than Gregory expected, not in curiosity, but in something that looked dangerously close to recognition. He didn't like it. Gregory stepped forward, placing himself between the child and his daughter. What did you just say? His voice was even, but it carried the weight of a man who had torn down boardrooms and buried competitors with a glance. The boy didn't flinch. I said I can help her walk again. Then he added, with the innocence of a child and the precision of someone who knew it would matter, but you'll have to listen. And you can't use money. Gregory's jaw tensed. He'd heard pitches like this before from cultish gurus, from manipulative, spiritual healers who preyed on pain. But those people always wore smiles that felt like sales. This boy was different. He looked solemn, like someone mourning a truth before it had even been spoken. You're wasting my time, Gregory said, reaching for Naomi's wheelchair. He felt a sick bitterness twist in his gut, the kind that came every time hope appeared in a new disguise. Hope had become a thief. A liar. I'm not, the boy said quietly. You're just not ready to believe anything that isn't written in a report. That stopped Gregory. He turned again slowly. Who are you? The boy hesitated. I'm someone who doesn't belong here. But I came because she called me. Gregory blinked. Called you? She didn't. She didn't have to say it out loud. The boy interrupted, his voice soft. She stopped hoping. When someone stops hoping but still wants, the wanting becomes louder than sound. Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it. His world had always been one of precision, of facts and forecasts. And yet, standing in that alley, he felt something unnameable crawl through the cracks in his armor. Not belief, not yet, but the awareness that something was happening that didn't fit into his carefully ordered world. Naomi, still watching, spoke her first words of the morning. What's your name? The boy smiled faintly, as if her voice confirmed something he'd already known. They used to call me Ash, he said. A long time ago. Gregory crouched beside Naomi, placing a hand on her arm. Naomi, we're leaving. But Dad, her voice was barely above a whisper. Just for a minute? It was the first time she had protested in months. The first time something stirred beneath her stillness. Gregory looked at her, truly looked. And in her face he saw what he feared most, the flicker of belief. That fragile, painful thing. He wanted to protect her from it, and yet, for a single heartbeat, he didn't want to extinguish it either. He straightened and faced Ash. If you're playing some kind of game. I'm not, the boy said. But this won't work if you keep trying to control it. Gregory exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. The silence between them stretched, not empty, but taut with something unseen. In the distance, the city hummed. Cars, sirens, the machinery of normal life. But here in the alley, it felt like another world entirely. What do you want from me? Gregory asked finally, quietly. Ash's eyes flickered toward Naomi. Not from you. From her. I just need you not to interfere. That sentence landed like a stone. Gregory had always been the architect of outcomes. Standing aside was not in his nature. But Naomi, she nodded. Slowly, with a certainty she hadn't shown since before the accident. I want to listen, she said. Gregory felt the tightness in his chest swell. His instincts screamed to intervene. But her voice, that small, steady voice, held him back. Ash stepped forward and knelt until he was eye level with her. Then he reached into the oversized coat and pulled out a small, delicate object wrapped in cloth, something dark, smooth, and gently humming with a low, rhythmic pulse. Gregory leaned forward, alarmed, but Naomi didn't flinch. She stared at the object as though it were familiar, even comforting. What is that? Gregory asked. Ash didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly into Naomi's eyes and said, This will show you things you forgot you knew. You'll have to go somewhere far from here. But I'll guide you. I won't leave. Naomi nodded again, her voice firmer now. Okay. Gregory couldn't take it anymore. He moved to step between them. And then, suddenly, the world changed. Not in a grand, apocalyptic rupture, but in something subtle. A shift in the air. The alley darkened without losing light. The edges of the world blurred, and for a moment, Gregory felt like he was underwater, breath caught in his throat, surrounded by something vast and ancient and not meant to be named. Naomi's body jerked once, not in pain, but like something had passed through her. Her eyes rolled back. The wheelchair trembled, and the object in Ash's hands dissolved into thin strands of light that wove themselves into Naomi's skin, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Then silence. Naomi slumped forward, unconscious but unharmed. Ash stood, his expression unreadable. "She'll be gone for a while," he said quietly. "Where she's going, time works differently. But when she comes back, she'll remember." Gregory stared, every part of him screaming for answers. Remember what? Ash looked at him for a long time. What it cost her, and what it will cost you. Then, without another word, the boy turned and walked down the alley, vanishing before he reached the end. Gregory stood in the stillness, his hand on Naomi's motionless shoulder, his mind spinning with 1,000 impossible questions. Above them, the sky remained gray. But somehow, impossibly, it no longer felt empty. Naomi woke not with a gasp, but with a quiet sigh, the kind that escapes when a dream ends too early. Her eyes opened slowly, searching the hospital ceiling as if it no longer belonged to her. The fluorescent lights above her hummed dully, the steady pulse of machines filling the air like a second heartbeat. Gregory, who had not left her side in the 24 hours since the alley, straightened in his chair, relief and dread warring silently in his chest. "You're awake," he said, almost afraid the words would disturb whatever fragile thing had returned to her. Naomi turned her head toward him, blinking with something like confusion, but not the kind he expected. Not fear, not disorientation, but a kind of quiet grief, as though she had seen too much and left part of herself behind. "I saw her," Naomi whispered. Gregory leaned forward. "Who?" "My mother." Gregory froze. Her mother had died when Naomi was 5. She never spoke of her. Not since the accident. Not since the silence swallowed most of her memories. She was waiting. In the orchard, Naomi continued, voice thin as thread. There were apple trees, but they weren't just trees. They felt like memories rooted into the ground. Every step I took, I remembered something else. Gregory didn't speak. He didn't know how to. Her words were half a poem, half a riddle, and he didn't trust language enough to hold what she was saying. "She told me I wasn't broken, just trapped." Naomi closed her eyes again. "She said there's a place and that I have to go there to finish what started. She didn't say what it was, just that it would hurt, but that I'd come back whole." Gregory's instinct, always, was to protect, to shield, to control, to chart the terrain. But now, faced with something beyond maps and contracts, he felt helpless. Powerless in the way only a parent can feel when love isn't enough. "Where is this place?" he asked, not expecting an answer. Naomi's lips trembled. She called it the grove that remembers. Ash knows the way. But Ash had disappeared. No trace. No security camera had captured him leaving the alley. No fingerprint. Not even a last name. Still, 2 days later, as the sun broke across the jagged rooftops of the city, Gregory found himself loading Naomi into a discreet black van with tinted windows and state-of-the-art suspension. He didn't know where they were going, only that she had asked to follow what she'd seen, and for once, he had said yes. The first leg of the journey was silent. Naomi stared out the window, as though the world itself had changed hue. Gregory kept checking the mirrors, half expecting Ash to appear in the rear view. But it was only the road, unwinding like a question with no punctuation. Eventually, Naomi spoke. "Do you think you're the reason I'm like this?" Gregory's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What? You think it's your fault, don't you?" Her voice wasn't accusing, just curious. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Naomi continued, her eyes never leaving the horizon. "It's not. The accident wasn't because of you. But the way I stayed broken after, maybe that was because of both of us." He felt the words like salt in an old wound. "I tried everything. Every doctor. Every specialist." "I know," she said quietly. "But you only ever try to fix my body. You never sat still long enough to ask what it felt like to be me. Gregory swallowed hard. I didn't know how. I know. Silence returned. But it was softer now, not distance, but shared space. They drove through forested highways, past ghost towns and forgotten rail lines, following coordinates that Naomi drew by hand from dreams she claimed weren't hers. Her maps looked like spirals. Or fingerprints. Gregory followed anyway. It was on the fifth day, just before dusk, that they reached a path the GPS didn't recognize, a narrow dirt trail leading into the belly of an ancient forest. The trees here were impossibly tall, their trunks wide enough to cradle a house. The air smelled of moss, earth, and something fainter, like old songs or whispered prayers. We walk from here, Naomi said, already unbuckling her harness. Gregory hesitated. You can't walk. She looked at him, and something in her eyes made the word can't feel unbearably small. I have to, she said, even if it hurts. And it did. Her first step was a fall. Gregory caught her, but she pushed him away gently and tried again. This time, her legs trembled but held. Not because they were strong, but because something in her refused to collapse. Step by step, they walked into the woods. The light changed as they moved, not just dimming, but deepening, like they were descending into memory. The path widened, then narrowed again, then vanished entirely. But Naomi seemed to know where to go, as though the forest bent itself around her grief. They arrived at the grove at midnight. It was not a place in the traditional sense. No signs, no buildings, just an open circle of trees that shimmered faintly under moonlight. In the center, a stone basin filled with water, so still it looked like glass. Naomi stepped into the circle without hesitation. Gregory remained at the edge, watching. Ash was already there. He stood on the other side of the basin, silent, hands folded. His coat was the same. His eyes, not older, not younger, just impossibly steady. She's ready, he said. Naomi knelt by the basin. What happens now? You remember what the pain tried to erase. Gregory wanted to move, to intervene, but couldn't. His body felt held in place by something vast and invisible. Naomi placed her hands in the water. It shimmered. The trees stirred. And then, slowly, memories began to rise. Not images. Feelings. Laughter she'd buried. Screams she had silenced. The helpless fury of waking in a hospital bed and seeing her father's perfect composure instead of his tears. The time he didn't show up to her recital. The time she begged not to get in the car before the accident. The whispered prayers no one heard. The moments she wanted to die and didn't. The weight of being brave, because everyone else needed her to be. The grove held it all. Gregory sobbed, not loud, but raw, as if something cracked inside him. Not just guilt, grief. Love too heavy to carry and too precious to drop. When it ended, Naomi stood. She walked, really walked, across the grove to her father. He held her, not like a man who had saved her, but like a man finally forgiven for not knowing how. And in that sacred, ancient silence, the forest listened. And remembered. The morning after the grove, Naomi woke not to silence, but to birdsong. It wasn't loud, not even particularly melodic, but it was present, and that alone made her sit up. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing fog that had long coiled itself around her limbs like chains. She stretched, slowly, cautiously, as though testing the shape of her own being. Her legs, once atrophied by both trauma and time, trembled beneath her, but they responded. The pain was still there, like an echo of a language she no longer needed to speak. But it no longer ruled her. Gregory sat near the edge of the grove, his back resting against a cedar trunk. He looked older in the golden light. Not tired, exactly, just human in a way she hadn't let herself see before. For years, he'd been a pillar, immovable and impenetrable. But now, his shoulders drooped with the weight of a father who had finally stopped trying to fix what was never broken. Naomi walked to him. Not stumbled. Not crawled. Walked. He looked up, and for a second, He didn't believe what he saw. She said nothing, just offered her hand. And something broke in him, not like glass, but like ice giving way to spring. They didn't speak of what had happened in the night. The grove was behind them now, though in some ways it would never leave. It lived under Naomi's skin, in the tender way she now carried herself, in the silence between heartbeats where she once stored pain. The world beyond the trees felt changed, or perhaps she was simply seeing it, finally, with eyes unclouded. Ash had vanished again. No footprints. No farewell. Just a single word carved into the bark of a tree near where he had stood. Remember. The drive back was not quick. Naomi asked to take the long way, through towns with names she couldn't pronounce and fields that stretched wide with unspoken meaning. They stopped often. Once at a roadside diner where Naomi ordered pancakes and smiled, really smiled, when the waitress got her order wrong. Another time by a river, where she sat barefoot on a rock and let the cold water kiss her toes. Gregory watched her like a man watching the first sunrise after years of living underground. He didn't interrupt her moments, just bore witness. But miracles are strange things. They don't always declare themselves with fire or thunder. Sometimes they show up as a breath that no longer hurts to take, a memory that no longer burns to touch, a voice inside that no longer says, "You're not enough." For Naomi, the miracle arrived in layers. Not all at once. It was the moment she returned to her apartment and no longer feared its shadows. When she opened the closet and found the violin case, untouched for 6 years, and instead of weeping, tuned it. When she played that first note, the air changed. Not because the sound was perfect, but because she let it out.
Because she wanted to.
Gregory was in the kitchen making tea. He paused when he heard it. The violin. Her violin. His hands trembled, and for a moment he just stood there, letting the sound wrap around him. That single note contained so many things he hadn't dared hope for. Forgiveness, resurrection, a second chance. He didn't tell her he cried, but she knew. Weeks passed. Naomi enrolled in a music therapy program. She didn't know if she wanted to perform again. That part of her wasn't clear yet, but she wanted to heal. Others, this time. She began volunteering at the children's ward of the local hospital, the same place where she once sat for months on end, speechless and furious. Now, she played to the kids with tubes in their arms and fear in their eyes. Not to distract them, but to speak to them in the language she'd once thought she'd lost. One child, her name was Lily, sat silently every time Naomi played. Never smiled, never clapped. But one afternoon, as Naomi began the first few bars of a soft lullaby her mother once sang, Lily reached forward and touched the strings. Not to stop her, to join her. It was in that moment that Naomi understood. The miracle wasn't that she could walk again, or play, or even forgive her father. It was that she chose to live, fully.
Despite everything.
That she had come through the fire and still had music in her soul. Gregory watched all of this with quiet pride. But even in joy, guilt lingers. It never disappears. It just changes shape. One evening, he stood by Naomi's door, coat in hand. "I think I need to go away for a while," he said. She looked up from her tea, thoughtful. "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere that forces me to stop being a CEO." "You'll be terrible at it," she said dryly. He smiled. "I hope so." Then she stood, walked to him, and hugged him. Not as a daughter who had returned, but as a woman who had survived. "No more fixing," she whispered. "Just be." That night, Gregory left without fanfare. Just a note on the counter that read, "Thank you for saving me too." Naomi stood at her window, watching the street. She could feel the air real, alive, sharp with autumn's promise. Her hands, once shaky, now felt steady as she lifted her violin again. The miracle had never been in the grove. It was in what she chose after.
To stay, to feel, to live.
And above all, to remember. The truth came quietly. Not like an explosion, not like the final twist in a play. It didn't shatter glass or bring people to their knees. It came in the form of a letter, A simple, weathered envelope tucked under Naomi's apartment door, without a return address, without ceremony, as though the sender was afraid the truth might burn too bright in the light of day. She stared at it for hours before opening it. There was something sacred about its stillness. Something terrifying. The envelope weighed almost nothing, yet in her hands, it pulsed with the gravity of years. Gregory had been gone for nearly 3 months. They spoke once a week, short, warm conversations laced with new softness. He had gone north, to an old cabin near the lakes he used to visit as a boy. For the first time in his life, he was learning how to be alone without being lonely. Naomi had settled into something resembling a life. Her music was returning in strange, new shapes, less about performance, more about presence. But even in peace, there was always a shadow in the corner of her vision. The missing pieces. The questions that lingered in her silence. She had long stopped asking why. But that didn't mean she had stopped feeling the gaps. When she finally opened the envelope, it wasn't Gregory's handwriting. The ink was elegant, careful, feminine. It began, "You don't know me, but I have known you since you were a child." Naomi's breath caught. The letter was from her mother's sister, Aunt Lydia, a woman she had never met, barely heard of. Someone erased from every photo, every memory her father ever shared. She'd assumed she was dead, or mad, or both. But here she was, not a ghost, but flesh and paper and words. And with her, a truth Naomi wasn't ready for, but needed. Lydia wrote about a woman named Elise, Naomi's mother, the woman whose name had become a monument in Gregory's life. A name he wore like a scar under his ribs, something beautiful and unbearable. Elise, the brilliant pianist. Elise, the laughing girl who once wore blue dresses and sang off-key when she was drunk. Elise, the love of Gregory's life. But there was another Elise, the one Lydia knew, the one whose family had a long history of bipolar disorder, the one who spiraled for years before anyone noticed. The one whose final years were marked not by serenity, but by frantic notes and sudden disappearances. Elise had tried. She had tried so hard to stay. For Naomi. For Gregory. But she was unraveling faster than anyone could stitch her back together. Gregory, Lydia wrote, had hidden it all. Not to protect Naomi. Not really. But to protect the version of Elise he couldn't bear to lose. And when Elise finally left, not by death, but by disappearance, he told Naomi she had died.
Lied.
Completely. Utterly. Because the truth, to him, was worse than death, that the woman they both loved had chosen to vanish into the world rather than risk destroying her daughter with her madness. Naomi dropped the letter. Her hands shook. She didn't cry. Not at first. She walked barefoot through her apartment, touching the violin, the framed photos, the couch where she'd once curled into herself after the surgeries. And only when she reached the mirror did she finally see it. Her own eyes. Elise's eyes. The storm in them. The hunger. The ache to be known without fear. And Naomi, for the first time, allowed herself to break. She called Gregory that night. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. But her voice was different.
Cold. Detached.
"You lied to me," she said. There was silence. Then a long, hollow breath. "I know." "Why?" Gregory didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was small. "Because I couldn't bear the idea that you'd think she left you. That she chose to disappear. I thought if she died, then she never stopped loving you. But if you knew the truth, you'd wonder what was wrong with you." Naomi's throat tightened. "So instead, I grew up wondering what was wrong with me every time I looked in the mirror and saw pieces of someone who never existed." "She existed," he whispered. "She loved you. But she was sick, Naomi. And I was too proud, too scared, too broken to face what that meant." Naomi wanted to hang up, but she didn't. Instead, she sat down. Did she ever try to reach out? Another long pause. "She sent a letter once. When you were 13. I didn't open it." "You didn't even open it?" "I was afraid it would unravel everything. That if I let her back in, I'd lose you." Naomi pressed her fingers to her lips. trying to hold something back, not tears, but fury. Or maybe grief disguised as rage. Where is she now? I don't know. And somehow, that answer was worse than anything else. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet disintegration. Naomi still taught,
Still played.
but the music was different,
Hesitant.
fragmented. The grove's healing had not been undone, but it had been complicated. Healing, she realized, wasn't a single act. It was a choice made again and again, even after the truth shatters the world you had carefully rebuilt. Eventually, Naomi reached out to Lydia.
They spoke. Met.
Cried in public places over half-drunk cups of coffee. Lydia was older now, worn by her own battles, but her eyes held something Naomi hadn't seen in a long time: recognition. Not for the woman Naomi had become, but for the child she once was, confused, bright, angry. They searched together. Elise had changed her name, moved often, a trail of music programs and halfway houses. She had stayed out of Naomi's life on purpose. To protect her, or so she believed. It took months. And then one morning, Naomi opened her email to a message from a shelter in Montana. A woman there had read Lydia's post online. Said there was someone who fit Elise's description, a piano teacher.
Kind.
Quiet. Sometimes distant, sometimes luminous. She worked with children, mostly, rarely spoke of the past. But she kept a photograph by her bed, a baby in a white blanket, asleep on her chest. Naomi didn't book a ticket right away. She sat with the knowledge for days. Because the miracle wasn't that the truth had finally come. It was that she could choose what to do with it. And in that choice, that freedom, was something sacred. The final piece was never about reclaiming the past. It was about knowing it fully and then deciding, bravely, whether to step forward or to forgive what could never be rewritten. There are farewells that feel like endings, brutal, sudden, like the sound of a door slamming in the dark. And then there are farewells that feel like exhalations, quiet releases, not of people, but of what they once meant, what they once held. Naomi had thought of goodbyes as wounds. Now, she was beginning to see them differently, not as ruptures, but as transitions. The space between chapters. It was late autumn when she arrived in Montana. The shelter was nestled on the edge of a forgotten town, surrounded by wind-worn trees and sky that stretched like a canvas left unfinished. Naomi didn't bring a suitcase. Just a backpack, her violin, and a heart that pulsed louder with every step toward the truth. Elise was there. Not as Naomi remembered her, not the warm scent of cinnamon, not the elegant hands guiding hers across piano keys. She was older, of course. Smaller. The vibrant fire that had once made rooms bend toward her had settled into a gentle glow. But her eyes, they were the same. Wide, glassy, uncertain. The reunion wasn't cinematic. There were no dramatic tears. No running embraces. Just silence. Naomi stood at the edge of the community center, watching Elise run her fingers along the keys of an old upright piano, humming to herself. It took her nearly 5 minutes to look up. And when she did, her mouth opened, as if to speak, but no words came. Naomi stepped forward, slowly. Sat beside her. They didn't talk that day. Not much. Elise offered tea. Naomi declined. They sat in that room for hours, each waiting for the other to fracture the silence. Eventually, Elise said one thing. "I'm sorry I didn't come back." Naomi nodded. That was all. The next few days unfolded like something fragile between glass. Elise showed her the garden she tended, introduced her to the children she taught, told stories, not of Gregory, not of Lydia, but of herself, of the years lost to medication and misdiagnosis, of the times she woke up not knowing her own name, and of the day she decided, finally, not to die. Naomi didn't forgive her immediately, but she listened. She asked questions.
And she grieved.
Not for the woman Elise had been, but for the life that had never been lived. The family that never quite made it intact. The birthdays missed. The concerts unplayed. The softness she once begged for and had to learn to give herself. One night, Naomi asked, Do you ever think about coming back? Elise looked at the moonlit ceiling. Her voice trembled. I thought about it every day. But by the time I knew how to live again, I thought it was too late. Naomi didn't reply, because she understood. Some absences stretch too far for bridges to cross, not because of anger, but because time has carved different rivers. They spent 2 weeks together.
Short walks.
Late night music. Sometimes laughter. Sometimes tears that came from nowhere, like sudden rain. On the last day, Elise handed her a worn leather-bound journal. Naomi opened it slowly. Inside, hundreds of pages. Music. Letters. Sketches of Naomi as a child. All drawn from memory. I never stopped being your mother, Elise whispered. Even when I wasn't there. Naomi couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she held the book, like it might dissolve if gripped too hard. There, between ink and memory, was the woman she'd tried to reconstruct from fragments. She stayed until the sun began to fade behind the trees. When she finally stood, Elise didn't ask her to stay longer. She only said, "Promise me one thing." Naomi met her gaze. "When you play, play everything. Even the ugly notes. Even the ones that hurt." Naomi didn't promise. She just turned, and before she left the doorway, whispered, "I already do." The flight home was silent. Naomi watched the clouds pass and thought not of what was lost, but of what had been transformed. She didn't feel healed, not in the way people often romanticized. She felt altered, sharpened, and in that edge was something resilient. Back in the city, winter had begun to settle in. Gregory had returned from his self-exile with a softer look in his eyes. He had started writing again, not memoirs, not business books, but journals.
Quiet things.
Naomi hadn't read them. She didn't need to. They had dinner once a week now. No tension. No scripts. Just presence. At the hospital, Lily, the silent girl from months ago, was now playing full songs on the violin. Clumsy, aching, but brave. Naomi often sat beside her, no longer a guide, but a companion. And in the evenings, Naomi would sit by her window, open Elise's journal, and transcribe the music. Note by note. Each line a resurrection. Not for her mother, but for herself. One night, after a performance for a small crowd of students and their families, someone asked her, "What do you want your legacy to be?" Naomi smiled, thought about it, then said simply, "I want the music to outlive the pain." And in that answer, in that soft defiance, lived the truest legacy of all, not in bloodlines, not in fame, not even in survival, but in transcendence. A life not untouched by sorrow, but rewritten through it. A farewell that didn't mean forgetting. A daughter who no longer searched for love in the ruins of the past, but created it, measure by measure, with her own hands. Spring arrived quietly that year. There was no announcement, no dramatic thaw, just a gentle loosening, of frost, of silence, of old griefs that had gripped too tightly for too long. Naomi noticed it first not in the trees, but in herself, in the way she breathed more freely when she woke, in how her hands no longer trembled when she played certain chords, in the stillness of her own reflection, not serene, but whole. She didn't know when it had begun, this rebirth. Healing, she realized, never arrived all at once. It seeped, like light through broken curtains, like music under a locked door. That April, she performed again. A real stage, a real audience. It wasn't in a grand concert hall, just a community theater near the edge of the city, but the seats were full, and the air was thick with anticipation. She chose a program that told a story. First came the dissonance, pieces that throbbed with anguish, with clashing tones and unresolved cadences. Then the longing, slow, trembling adagios that hovered on the edge of confession. And finally, without announcement, she played a composition no one had ever heard before. Her own. It began with a single note, quiet, vulnerable, then unfolded into something aching and strange. It held Elise's ghost, Gregory's sorrow, Lydia's strength, the tremble of a child's violin, the silence of hospital corridors. And it held Naomi, All the versions of her. The girl who waited, the woman who broke, and the soul who had learned not to fear the echo of her own music. When the final note faded, the room didn't clap right away. There was a stillness, a reverence, as though the audience understood they had witnessed not just a performance, but a testament. And then a wave of applause, rising like a tide. Naomi bowed, not just out of ritual, but as an offering, as if saying, "Thank you for seeing me." In the weeks that followed, things didn't become perfect. Gregory was still a man learning how to live without guilt. They wrote to each other often. Long letters, sometimes silly, sometimes heavy, with fragments of memories and questions they never dared ask when Naomi was younger. Elise wrote too. Not often. But when she did, her letters were filled with small, unremarkable things. The garden's stubborn herbs, a child's off-key rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, the way her cat refused to sleep anywhere but on her sheet music. And somehow, those details felt like redemption. Not because they were extraordinary, but because she was still here. Naomi continued teaching. Not just violin, but presence. Her students learned to feel before they learned to impress. To make mistakes. To listen to their own hesitations like they were part of the melody. She kept the journal Elise gave her. Sometimes she read it. Sometimes she didn't. It rested on her piano like a sleeping animal, alive, but peaceful. One evening, as sunlight curled against the window panes and the city breathed its golden hour hush, Naomi took a walk to the park near her childhood home. She hadn't been there in years. The old bench was still there, chipped and faded. She sat down, ran her fingers along the splintered wood, and closed her eyes. Children were playing. A street violinist tuned his instrument across the square. Somewhere, a couple was arguing in low tones. Life, in all its unpolished rhythm, surrounded her. She smiled. For a long time, she had believed she needed closure, answers, resolution. But now, sitting in the shadow of her past, she understood something far deeper. What we call endings are rarely final. Some loves never vanish, they transform. Some wounds never close, they become maps. And some lives, fractured as they are, carry music that was never meant to be perfect, only true. Naomi stood, walked slowly back home, and opened the windows. The breeze carried the scent of rain and lilacs. A chord came to her unbidden, but welcome. She sat at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. This time, it was not for the lost. Not for the mother who disappeared, or the man who tried too hard to protect her from the truth. It was not for Lily, or Lydia, or anyone else who had walked alongside her healing. This time, it was for herself. And that quiet reclaiming was the most touching ending of all. Because it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning.